It was an old farmhouse that had been in the family for generations. Situated on the outskirts of a small town, it had always been a place of refuge and comfort for the family. But as the years passed, the house began to show signs of decay and neglect. One summer, a family decided to rent the farmhouse for a week-long vacation. The family consisted of a couple, their 2 children, and the family dog. The first few days went by without incident, but as the week progressed, strange things began to happen. The family would hear footsteps in the hallway, but when they went to investigate, no one was there. Doors would slam shut on their own, and objects would move without explanation. The family dog, who had always been friendly and outgoing, suddenly became skittish and refused to leave the bedroom. On the last night of their vacation, the family decided to investigate the strange occurrences. They began by searching the attic, where they found an old trunk filled with ancient documents and journals. As they read through the journals, they discovered that the farmhouse had been built on top of an old burial ground, and that the spirits of the dead were angry at the intrusion. Suddenly, the family heard a loud banging coming from the basement. They cautiously made their way down the stairs and found themselves face to face with a ghostly figure. The figure was that of a young girl, dressed in a white dress, her eyes empty and her skin pale. The family was paralyzed with fear as the ghostly figure advanced towards them. Suddenly, the family dog leapt from the shadows and attacked the ghostly figure. The ghostly figure let out a blood-curdling scream before disappearing into thin air. The family gathered their things and left the farmhouse that night, never to return. But as they drove away, they could hear the ghostly laughter of the young girl echoing through the night, reminding them of the horror they had experienced in that old farmhouse. In a small village on the outskirts of town, there stood an old, dilapidated farmhouse. The locals whispered about it being haunted, but no one dared to venture inside. It belonged to an old lady who had lived there for decades and was known to be reclusive and mysterious. One autumn evening, a group of teenagers decided to explore the farmhouse. They had heard the stories and were eager to discover the truth behind the rumors. As they walked through the overgrown garden towards the front door, they couldn't shake off the eerie feeling that enveloped them. The door creaked as they pushed it open, and the musty smell of old furniture filled their nostrils. The teenagers moved from room to room, searching for any sign of paranormal activity. As they reached the upstairs landing, they heard a creaking sound coming from the end of the hallway. Slowly and cautiously, they approached the source of the noise. Suddenly, the floorboards beneath them caved in, and they fell through to the room below. It was a dark and dusty space with an old rocking chair in the corner. The chair began to move on its own, creaking back and forth as if someone was sitting in it. Suddenly, an old lady appeared before them, her eyes glazed over, and her skin a sickly pale color. She moved closer and closer, her bony fingers reaching out towards them. The teenagers screamed and scrambled to get away, but it was too late. The old lady had already latched onto them, her grip like iron. They struggled and fought, but it was no use. They were trapped, and there was no escape. For years after the incident, the villagers talked about the group of teenagers who had disappeared at the old farmhouse. Some believed that the old lady had cursed them and that they were now doomed to roam the halls of the haunted house forever. Others were too scared to even mention their names. One thing was for sure, the old farmhouse would remain a place of terror and mystery for generations to come. It was a dark and stormy night, and the old farmhouse creaked and groaned as the wind whipped through the surrounding fields. Inside, the family huddled together, their eyes glued to the crackling fire in the hearth. As the night wore on, the storm grew more intense, the wind howling like a pack of wolves at the door. Suddenly, a loud banging sound echoed through the house, causing the family to jump in fright. The father bravely rose from his seat and walked towards the door to investigate. As he opened the door, the wind slammed it shut, nearly taking his arm with it. He peered out into the dark and saw nothing but the driving rain. As he turned back towards his family, he noticed that his wife and children were staring at him with wide-eyed horror. It was then that he realized that something was terribly wrong. The family heard footsteps upstairs, but no one else should have been in the house. Fear overtook them, and they huddled together, whispering and praying for safety. Suddenly, the lights went out, plunging the house into complete darkness. The family members were now paralyzed with fear, unable to see each other or what was happening around them. The storm continued to rage outside, and the sound of the wind and rain mixed with the terrifying sounds of footsteps coming closer and closer. Then, they heard a scream, a blood-curdling scream that pierced through the storm. The family knew that they were not alone in the house and that they were in grave danger. As the storm began to calm down, the family members were able to make out a figure standing at the end of the hallway. It was a ghostly figure dressed in rags, with empty eyes that seemed to stare right through them. The family members could hear the sound of the figure's footsteps drawing closer and closer to them. They huddled together, praying for salvation. But just as the figure was about to reach them, a bolt of lightning struck the house, illuminating the entire room in a blinding flash. When the light faded, the ghostly figure was gone, and the family was left alone, shivering in the dark. The family was never able to explain what happened that night. But they knew that something malevolent had visited them, and they were grateful to have survived. From then on, they never again spent a stormy night in that old farmhouse.